April 12, 2026. Bristol Motor Speedway, 505 laps. One of the most dominant single-car performances of the entire 2026 NASCAR Cup Series. And at the end of it all, Kyle Larson climbed out of his number 5 Hendrick Motorsports Chevrolet third place, not first. Here is the number that tells the whole story before we even get into 284 laps led. That is the number Larson put on the board at Bristol. He also swept both opening stages, controlled the race for enormous stretches, and looked for long stretches like the driver everyone else would be chasing. And yet, when the checkered flag flew, it was Gibbs celebrating his first career NASCAR Cup Series victory, and Larson was left talking about mistakes, miscommunications, and a race that got completely crazy. This is not a story about a driver who had a bad day. This is a story about a driver who had one of the best days of the season and still went home without the win. And the way Larson talked afterward made it clear he knew exactly how much the one stung. Before we get into what went wrong, we need to understand what Larson brought to Bristol and why this race carried so much weight heading. Larson entered the Food City 500 still winless through the first 7 races of 2026, but he was not in trouble by any stretch. NASCAR's official driver page showed him sitting 6th in points with strong underlying speed race. The wins were not coming, but the pace was there, and Bristol, historically, has been one of his best tracks on the entire calendar. Before the race, Larson spoke like a driver who had complete command of what Bristol demanded. He talked about having a feel for the pace, about traffic navigation maturing more than people realize, and about how the groove changes constantly throughout the afternoon. He did not sound like a driver chasing something. He sounded like a driver who already understood the puzzle. Ryan Blaney was the other name entering the weekend with serious momentum. Blaney started from the pole position after clocking the fastest car in practice on 15-20-25-30 lap averages. The number 12 team Penske Ford was the benchmark before a single green flag lap had been run. These were the two drivers everyone expected to control the race. And for most of the afternoon, that is exactly what happened. When the green flag dropped at Bristol, Larson validated every bit of pre-race confidence almost immediately. He started from 8th position. That is important context. He was not handed the lead. He had to earn it through traffic on one of the toughest tracks in the series for passing. And he did it in just 44 laps, charging all the way to the front. Getting past Blaney for the lead before the race was even a quarter of the way. From there, the number 5 Chevrolet simply took over. Larson won Stage 1 over Christopher Bell, Blaney, and Chase Briscoe. Then in Stage 2, a 125-lap stretch in the middle of the race, Larson led all but one lap. He swept both stages at Bristol for the 3rd time in his career, becoming the 9th driver in history to surpass the 2,000 laps lead barrier at the track known as the world's fastest half. That is not just a solid after, that is historic race control. The reason it looked so clean for Larson during those first 2 stages had a lot to do with what was happening on the other side of pit road. Blaney had the fastest car, but the number 12 pit crew kept handing away the advantage every time the cars came down pit lane. According to NASCAR Insights, the number 12 crew ranked 32nd fastest of the 37 teams on track Sunday. And entering Bristol, they had already lost 85 positions on Pittsburgh Road through the first 7 races, a staggering number that was 30 spots worse than the next closest competitor. Larson himself addressed this directly after this. Thankfully, Blaney's pit crew, I don't know what was happening to their day on pit road, but it was putting him behind and having to work and allowed me to settle in, lead laps, and barely hang on to stages. Larson told her, "I knew if the 12 ever had a good pit stop or even a better restart, which both of those started happening, he would be tough to hold off." That was the case. That quote tells you everything about how Larson understood the race, and he knew Blaney was faster. He knew the only reason he was leading was because the number 12 crew kept erasing the cars at each. And he knew it was only a matter of time before that equation shifted. But before Blaney's crew issues even fully resolved themselves, Larson had already dealt himself a problem he created on his own. During Stage 2, Larson misheard a radio call from his spotter Tyler May, told him there were 50 laps left in the stage. Larson thought he heard 15 to go. The result was that he pushed the car much harder, much earlier than the strategy. He burned through more tire life than planned and expended energy on a run that should have been managed more carefully. He still recovered to win the stage, which tells you just how fast that number 5 Chevrolet was. But the cost of that mistake did not show up. It showed up later in the tire wear, in the rhythm of the car, and in his ability to sustain pace on the long. This is the kind of error that does not blow up a race in one moment. It compounds slowly and reveals itself when it is already too late. At that point, Bristol was starting to become a very different race than the one Larson thought he would. While Larson and Blaney were trading the lead and combining to lead 474 of 505 laps, there was a third name working his way into the conversation. Physician nobody was fully tracked. Ty Gibbs, driving the number 54 Joe Gibbs Racing Toyota, started 5th but got shuffled back to 14th in the early. He spent much of the first 2 stages fighting just to stay in the picture. But lap by lap, run by run, the number 54 kept moving forward, stringing together consistent top 5 finishes through each stage and ending stage 2 in 7th. The Gibbs backstory matters. He is the grandson of NASCAR Hall of Fame team owner and former Super Bowl winning coach Joe Gibbs. He is also the son of the late Coy Gibbs, who passed away in his sleep on November 6, 2022, just hours after Ty won the championship in NASCAR's second highest. Ty entered Bristol having made 130 Cup Series starts without a single win, carrying the weight of that legacy and that loss in every race. But entering April 12th, Gibbs had finished inside the top 6 each of the last 5 races. Something had clearly changed, and his crew chief Tyler Allen had already laid the groundwork for a strategy philosophy that would prove decisive before the afternoon was over. Here is where the race stopped being about who was fastest and became entirely about who was smartest. With 22 laps remaining, Chase Elliott spun to bring out the 8th caution of the afternoon. The field was suddenly faced with a critical decision at the worst possible moment, and the 3 main contenders went in 3 completely different directions. Gibbs stayed out. He held track position on old tires and inherited the race lead. Carson Hocevar, Chase Briscoe, Denny Hamlin, Tyler Reddick also stayed out. Larson came down pit road and took 2 fresh tires, restarting 6th. Blaney took 4 fresh tires and restarted 7th. When the green flag flew again, the race became a war between track position and tire advantage. Gibbs was out front, but running rubber that was nearly 100 laps. Blaney and Larson had fresh tires and the speed to close ground quickly. Larson raced forward to 3rd almost immediately. Blaney also charged hard, but Gibbs held the line. I don't want to give up track position at all. Gibbs had told crew chief Allen over the radio caution. That call, and Allen's decision to honor it, was the move that set up everything that followed. Just when it looked like Gibbs might be able to manage the gap to the finish, the race took one more violent. With 4 laps remaining, Kyle Busch spun Riley Herbst in what appeared to be deliberate retaliation for an earlier incident, too. The caution flew. The race went to overtime. It was the first overtime period at Bristol in 11. The field reset. Gibbs out front on old tires. Blaney and Larson directly behind him with rubber that was nearly 100 laps fresher. On paper, this should have been an easy pass. On paper, Gibbs should not have survived a 2-lap shootout against 2 former Cup Series champions with a massive tire advantage. But Bristol does not always follow the. Blaney went side by side with Gibbs through the final lap, sliding and drag racing to the checkered flag. At the line, Gibbs crossed first by just 0.055 seconds. It was the closest finish at Bristol since Rusty Wallace beat Ernie Irvan by 1 foot in April of 1991. Larson finished 0.229 seconds behind in 3rd. Gibbs became the 6th driver in NASCAR history to earn his first Cup Series win at Bristol, joining Dale Earnhardt, 1979, Rusty Wallace, 1986, Ernie Irvan, 1990, Elliott Sadler, 2001, and Kurt Busch, 2002. It was also the first win for the number 54 since Lenny Pond won the only race of his career at Talladega in 1979. After the race, Larson did not deflect. He did not point fingers in every direction. He laid out exactly how Bristol slipped away from him, piece by piece, in a post-race breakdown that was as honest as any driver assessment 2026 season. Blaney had by far the best car, Larson acknowledged. His pit crew just kept putting him behind all day, which really allowed us to lead a lot of laps, get those stage wins. Yeah, so that was good. Happy about all of that. He went further, addressing the way the race ultimately ended up out of his control. Just knew it was going to be difficult to hold him off. Seemed like every restart, he could just plow right through the field and get a second. It was just really fast. And on the final run, Larson was equally direct. Then Ty got strong there the last run, too. That was probably my worst run. We were making some adjustments at that point. I just got a little bit out of the track. Yeah, they were just better than me. On the strategy scramble at the end, he summed it up with one sentence that captured the entire chaos of final. Got crazy at the end with the strategy and still finished 3rd I'll take it. That is not a happy driver talking. That is a driver who fully understands that the race spiraled away from anything clean or predictable. And the winless streak, now sitting at 32 races dating back to May 11, 2025 at Kansas Speedway, made the loss land that much harder. While Larson processed the loss, victory lane at Bristol was filled with something much heavier than a trophy presentation. Gibbs climbed from a number 54 Toyota and was immediately surrounded by his mother Heather, his grandfather Joe, and his cousin Jackson Gibbs, who serves as a tire changer on the number 50. The celebration was emotional in a way that went far beyond the result on timing sheet. "I'd love for my father to have seen this," Gibbs said. "I knew he knew it was going to happen and expected it as." Joe Gibbs spoke about his late son during the celebration. "When I think about Coy, he brought Ty up the entire time. I know he's probably watching." Heather Gibbs put the win in its full context. "My husband, I think he would have been so happy. I think that's what's probably the hardest part today, right? So bittersweet. I wish it were him with Ty and not me today. I wish Coy were here to celebrate with his son, but he prepared him for all these moments." Ryan Blaney, despite finishing just 0.055 seconds behind, made time to offer genuine praise. "You never forget your first one, that's for sure. Even though I'm bummed we didn't win the race, I'm happy that Ty was able to get his first win because I remember what that was like, and I remember the elation and the joy, especially when you've come close a handful of times." Blaney also acknowledged something the result made impossible to ignore. "Ty's dealt with a lot of criticism, I feel like, from the outside. I feel like he's handled it pretty well, and it's good to see that he's been able to prove himself on the racetrack." This race did not just produce a winner and a set of standings. It exposed real fault lines in the championship picture that will matter for the next several. Blaney's pit crew situation has now become one of the defining storyline 2026 season. The number 12 lost 11 positions on Pittsburgh Road at Bristol alone. Entering the race, the crew had already dropped 85 spots over 7 races, 30 worse than any other. Blaney bluntly addressed it after the race. "We got to get it better. If we're going to keep competing and get cars that can win the races, we got to clean that up." Crew chief Jonathan Hassler remained measured but acknowledged the reality. "We had a couple mistakes again, but they stuck with it. All of those guys are capable and we've stuck with them, and when everything was on the line the most, they followed." For Larson, the result at Bristol is frustrating but not alarming in isolation. He now has 5 top 10 finishes in 8 races and sits 6th in the standings with 260. The speed is clearly there. The car is capable of winning, but a 32-race winless drought for a defending Cup Series champion demands explanation. In Bristol, where he led 284 laps and still finished 3rd, only deepens the question. Tyler Reddick continues to lead the championship, but his points advantage over Blaney shrank to 62 points after Gibbs, meanwhile, now carries a 6-race streak, top 10 finishes into the next, having finally converted sustained momentum into a victory. There was also a secondary storyline underneath the result that cannot be an ongoing lawsuit between Joe Gibbs Racing and Spire Motorsports over the hiring former JGR competition director Chris Gabehart has generated significant off-track noise. Allegations in court filings claim Gibbs was not held to the same meeting attendance standards as other drivers. Gibbs pushed back on that directly. "I've stayed after the whole time. Obviously, people are going to say false things about how I wasn't present, and I've been the same the whole time, just to clarify that." Bristol was his answer to every outside name. The NASCAR Cup Series heads to Kansas Speedway on April 19th for the Advent Health 400, and the storyline surrounding that race almost writes itself. Kansas Speedway is the site of Kyle Larson's last Cup Series, which came on May 11, 2025. Every race since that day has added to a drought that now stands at 32 consecutive starts without a victory. And now, after dominating Bristol and leaving with nothing to show for, Larson arrives at Kansas carrying exactly the kind of frustration that either fuels a breakthrough or deepens the silence. Hendrick Motorsports has won 3 of the last 4 races. Both Larson and Chase Elliott won there in 2025. The track sets up well for the number 5 Chevrolet. The speed has been there all season, but as Bristol made absolutely clear, speed alone does not close races. The best car at Bristol did not win. The most laps led at Bristol did not win. The cleanest strategy, the right call at the right caution, and the nerve to hold off 2 champions on old tires. That is what won. And if Larson cannot find a way to convert dominant runs into victory, Kansas will only add another chapter to a drought that is already the longest of Hendrick Motorsports. Bristol rewarded patience, strategy, and nerve. Kansas will demand the same. And for Kyle Larson, the question heading into that race is no longer about speed. It never really was. The question is whether everything else can align when it matters, because at Bristol, it did not. And 32 races of waiting is a long time for a defending champion to keep searching for an answer.